sacrifice, you won't make it. I don't even care where this road leads. All I know is when my heart is gone.
Boom shakalaka, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters around the world. It is your boy Chris Shule, aka the Esoteric Noetic, aka the Chocolate Nubian Soul Brother. That's my alias. We have Nicolette in the house. Nicolette is a researcher, a nutritionist, a metaphysician, a criminologist. God damn, what aren't you, Nicolette? I only just met this
DJ chef.
I only just met this amazing soul just about a week ago, and it was the first party I'd been to after these lockdowns, and I met someone, and then we have all these things in common. It turns out she's interested in X and Y, and we're talking about what's going on. Very conscious, and I'm like, whoa. You're the kind of person that I would love to get to know. I got to get you on my podcast. And turns out you were involved in some amazing stuff. But just beforehand, do you want to tell us a bit more about yourself? I mean, I've just given a brief overview, but what is it that you do, Nicolette?
Oh, God. Well, currently, as of this moment, I'm beginning my PhD fellowship at RMIT University in criminology, criminal justice. I just finished the the mini thesis, or had to go back to school because I had a 10-year break from university. So I had to go back and relearn everything. So I did an honors. Just got my mark. Great mark, 90% and above. But I actually walked away from this career 8 years ago, which I was pursuing in criminology and doing my thesis, and just a few personal issues came up during that time and needed a break, so moved to Alaska for a bit. Did that. Met my ex-partner, who's now my best friend, and then we sort of filmed a TV show. I got into nutrition and exercise physiology. Did that for a bit. Did some bodybuilding. Did a bodybuilding competition or two. Was pursuing a career again back into nutrition, but it didn't stimulate me as much as crime did. And I just realized I walked away from something, and I felt like I fell out. And I met my loving partner, who is my partner now, and he just said, "What are you doing in your life? You've got to give it a go again." So he sort of gave me the encouragement to believe in myself again. So I've gone back, and I back into criminology. Prior to that, I had a degree in forensic science, neuroscience, psychology, and criminology. And now I'm going back and finishing my PhD. I thought I had a clear vision of what my PhD was going to be, and now after this past year and everything that we've been experiencing in the world, I'm really lost to what to write about, just because of all the corporate crime I've been witnessing and human rights crime abuses that I've been witnessing. So it's really with everything that's been happening, my finger's on a pulse to write about what's happening now, as opposed to what my original thesis or research was on, which is to put a proper meditation program in prisons here in Australia. So that's what it was originally going to be on, and that's what I just did this thesis on. So it's I might do it in juveniles and test it on a juvenile population, because it's good to attack juvenile delinquents, not attack, but maybe put meditation into them so they sort of learn the right ways to deal with their emotions at an earlier time, because they're a bit more malleable. So I'm really fascinated in that, but with everything else that's been happening in the world, it's really hard. And I remember after our conversation, my first conversation with you a few weeks ago, we just spoke about so many aspects of what we'll talk about today, which is what Pfizer is responsible for, what companies have given up, things such as cryptocurrencies, to move into cryptocurrencies, NFTs, then going into the complete timing of how the metaverse all of a sudden has propped up after 2 years of isolation. And so it's been really interesting to watch, and then also the mass hypnosis that's happened on us. It's been really interesting to watch the world and people that's been happening in the world in the last 2 years. Like I've just sat back and I can't absorb enough of it, which sometimes annoys my friends because it is depressing, and I've got all this knowledge I want to talk to people about, and it's a lot for people to, unless you've got a strong heart. A lot of people check out, and that's what we see sometimes.
100%. I'm finding these conversations are becoming very, well, very few at the moment in terms of the people I can find that are actually willing to delve into these topics, because people are just so swamped under all the emotional stress right now, you know. But out of all of the things that you brought up there, what I find really interesting is how they're all related to what's going on right now. It's like you delve into so many different topics: the criminology, the nutrition, the metaphysics. You know, you're speaking about the metaverse, Bitcoin, and I find when I meet people that are aware of what's going on, they tend to have these interests because they're all kind of connected to essentially what we are seeing unfold in the world right now. But one thing I really wanted to focus on with you, like when you were talking about the criminology thing, like you made a point about how a big part of your focus, I guess, was rehabilitation for people, I presume, that have committed crimes and so forth. And it just made me realize that whereas we deal with criminals in terms of people that commit petty crimes, when it comes to corporate crimes, governmental crimes, like the kind of people that we see on the TV day in, day out, we don't address that. At least we don't seem to on the mainstream news. We don't offer rehabilitation to these dictators that are essentially depriving us of our human rights. When it applies to these big companies like some of the companies you mentioned, you know, like I call it Fizzer, courtcy of YouTube. Don't want this to get censored. But yeah, it's not something that we're
okay.
So does the research that you've done and the course that you've done, does it offer solutions to how to see justice from these corporations and these entities that are bringing about this crime on the mass public?
Unfortunately, that's the thing. I mean, sometimes when we're looking at the small petty crimes and stuff, there's a lot of shame and guilt attached to them, and that's, you know, sometimes the thing that makes people stop. But it doesn't happen with people in corporate crime. You know, as we know, sometimes it's even hard to pinpoint, for example, who's to blame in corporations because they're under the umbrella of a company. And a long time ago, I think it was in America legislation, you know, they label a corporation as a person. So the corporation then under legal statute has all the rights to protect it as a person does. but then you can't actually, when you're processing, trying to make arrest, who do you blame for the
Exactly.
decision of
Where's the individual?
many people? Whereas look at exactly what happened during the hotel quarantine debacle. Not one person was blamed for that. You know, like there's 801 or 800 something people dead, and everyone's I don't recall. And again, it's this whole collection of people. And what I believe right now, we'll go back to corporate crime, but what I believe what's happening right now is a whole bunch of people who don't know what they're doing, who are in charge, and they've got our lives in their hands, and they have no clue what they're doing. But back to corporation, like not only is shame and not attached to them, you know, they're looked after. They're looked after by lawyers. They're looked after by the media. You know, we don't know about the crimes they committed. They're not reported on. There's not, you know, a perfect example. I remember from the Michael Moore film ages ago, like when you know, America, that show cops, people are being arrested and it's shown on TV and they're being thrown on the hood of a car and stuff. That doesn't happen with a corporate criminal. Like, you know, even if they are found out, they're ushered gently out of the building. They're looked after. They're not like, you know, they're very rarely roughed up. Perfect example is look at the case that's happening right now in America with Theranos. I don't know if you know about the Elizabeth Holmes case. That's a very interesting case happening right now. Lots of good YouTube clips. She was this 9-10-year-old entrepreneur who was considered the new Steve Jobs, who thought her Edison machine that she apparently made could detect all diseases and viruses and everything like that, and diagnose people with one prick of blood, which you need more than a vial of blood to even test for many things. And so she convinced the American public and, people like Biden and who else was it? Henry Kissinger to back her project. And the machines didn't work. In fact, the blood that they got from the samples were diluted down and they gave the wrong results. So people were getting prescribed things like diabetic medication or being told they got cancer when it was all wrong.
Oh no! So this
And
was actually out in the market. This was not going through trials. This has actually been approved. Okay.
This was being marketed and sold in Walgreens nationwide. So that's how long this scam or this hoax went for. And so, they found out it was a lie. And like even the way she talks, she lies about her voice because she talks in this really low tone because she thinks she's supposed to sound intelligent. I just talk naturally low, so I'm good.
Is that a psychology thing? Like people that tend to have a lower voice? Yeah, that's interesting. Obviously,
apparently
something like that. Yeah. I have to be fair, like, because when we're talking about negligence here, at least this is what I presume the mainstream media would say, right? And whereas you could argue,
negligence.
Yeah, that this company is accident. I mean, as you mentioned, that this test was supposed to diagnose people accurately for certain diseases and whatnot, but it's doing whole things that it wasn't supposed to do. Even that issue alone, it's like there's no accountability when a corporation gets something like that wrong. Typically, you'd see some kind of restitution having to be paid by them to the people that have suffered. Whether this relates to any kind of pharmaceutical drugs, but obviously in the scheme of what we're seeing right now when it comes to the juice, the boom shakalakas, as I like to call them, we're not seeing any of that. But I guess more specifically to this scenario that you're talking about. So you think there was actually willful wrongdoing at hand?
Yeah. 100%.
Makes you think that?
100%. There were like whistleblowers have come out. They've got data and emails and everything else like that. So, from what they've witnessed, she's a compulsive liar. She's even like all of a sudden had a baby during this court process. I don't know who's she's not even living it. Like she's not even in jail. But all these whistleblowers and everyone came out saying like, well, these tests don't work because what was happening in the background was that they did a test and then they'd send it to an actual facility then to then run the test. So they weren't even running the tests in the machines. The machines were faulty, they'd break, and all these whistleblowers came out and said, well, this is actually happening. And Elizabeth Holmes then not only went after these whistleblowers, but did it viciously as well to silence them. So she was fully aware of what she was doing.
Do you think, you being the psychologist that you are, do you think there's an element of wanting to believe something is not true so much that you willfully ignore all the evidence? Because I personally feel from my experiences that I've had with people, like I try to read what people are going through in their minds, and I feel like a lot of times it is a case of people wanting so much to believe something that they'll ignore the truth, and it makes it seem as if they're being fraudulent, but there's some kind of weird psychology going on around there. What are your thoughts on that, being the resident psychologist?
Not an official psychologist. I just never appeared. Not a PhD. I just did a degree in it. So.
But just your personal opinion. Do you think there might be an element of that?
I think it's a twofold thing, and I've dealt with it on a personal scale with a member of my family who's a compulsive liar, and it just becomes this pattern of their behavior where they cannot stop and they cannot stop lying. They cannot, and in fact, if they start to tell the truth, it's actually there's a mechanism in their brain that actually makes them stressed out and not function properly. And it's been shown in lots of cases of compulsive liars, and even for example, cult leaders such as Jim Jones and that, where you just keep on going and keep on going, keep on feeding the lie. And again, there is always something in the back of their mind saying that they're doing it for a greater good or they're doing it for this, but then there's always atrocities involved. The old saying is the path to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's always a good intention being involved with anyone unless there are people who are just inherently evil who go out to purposely cause harm because they get gratification from it. But and that's what we've been seeing in the last 2 years with everything that's been happening, just surrounding boom shakalaka and everything else, is that everyone's trying to do the best decision that they think is right. A lot of people,
Yeah.
and that's where we're now in this mess, because we haven't been given the truth. With everything's been censored and covered up, so no one can actually make a proper informed choice. And I do believe there is like layers of people. So as you said, like, is it willing that people willingly hurt people? There, perfect example is another case, Enron, which was a big corporation case. You could hear traders on the phone laughing about people losing their money and hurting the lives of other people. So I do believe there is a part in someone or these people that they do know that they're causing harm, and they just don't have compassion. A lot of sociopaths and psychopaths run companies and are CEOs of companies, or are powerful people. You got to remember that people who want to be presidents and premiers and everything like that, there's a high level of narcissism in all these people. You want to help, but there is a narcissistic to try and get to that top level of power. So that's what I sort of believe.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a very complicated situation we're in, because there are many levels to what's going on, where you can bring it down to the individual level, like they're actual bad actors, but then the system is also structured in a way where, I mean, I have a look at the adversarial nature of the legal system, and a lot of the times you'll have lawyers that are fighting in the best interests of their of the person they're trying to defend, and even if that means that they have to avert prevent certain information from coming into the fore, which is going to show the truth in regards to the horrible things that their client has done, they will actively avoid sharing that information. And I recently heard a lawsuit. This was a case dealing with whether or not the information in regards to everything that's been going on with the Jews, the Bone Shakalakas, was going to be disclosed by Pfizer, right? I'm pretty sure that was the company. And I think one of the lawyers actually tried to get the judge to prevent this information from being released until something like I think it was 2070 something. Don't quote me.
2076.
Yeah, I believe so.
Years.
And it's like, well, what
years.
other purpose could there be other than you not wanting this information to come to the fore? And your job here is that you're trying to defend. I'm sure the lawyers justified it by saying, well, obviously I have to protect the interests of my client. And this is exactly what happens, whether you're defending the interests of the shareholder and whatnot. The system is geared towards not allowing the truth to come into the fore. You have a look at some of the backdoor deals that have taken place just in terms of what we're dealing with in Australia with with APRA obviously having gag orders on what doctors can speak about. And yeah, how do you, first of all, how do you think we resolve this thing? I mean, what's the best way of seeing justice in a system like the system we have in play at the moment?
It's unfortunately it's so hard, and I always try and think of, well, what would like the ideal situation be, but there's no good news. These people have there's so many different players and so many people involved, and so many different people who, I don't know if they willingly want to go along with the narrative, or they might think that they're doing the right thing. Like, I guess it's like perfect example is the whole Manhattan Project scenario, where like there were a lot of people working towards something, but they didn't know what they were working towards until the bomb exploded. What's it called? It's called compartmentalization. And I think there's a lot of people on, it's none of this whole big, like, it could be like this whole conspiracy, how it's planned, blah blah, but it's hard to know what's happening, because a lot of people are going along with the exact same narrative, as you said, where doctors are being censored. I think a really well-pronounced editor BMJ, the British Medical Journal, Peter Doshi, has just been censored, as well. So we've got all these high-profile people who are world-renowned and who have been world-renowned for their years, and no one's ever questioned who they were as people, or as individuals, or as sensible beings. And all of a sudden, they're not even worth a conversation, and they're being silenced. So this is happening on such a large global scale, and there's so many powerful people in play to let this happen. It's just like, well, how do you fight against this? And I've been trying to think about it for the last few months. Like, how do you pursue and go against people who pretty much control the world?
Yeah. Well,
and who can take you out and make you disappear. Like, I'm not saying that's not going to happen, but like, it can happen for some people.
Oh, 100% that stuff has happened. And that's the really difficult thing. A lot of people, there are some people that see what's going on. There are some people that see what's going on once they're shown, and then there are those that don't see. The problem is that for those that can actually see or have been shown, there's still this fear of what will happen to them. I think this is something that we're all facing right now. People that speak out. Just bear with me one moment to end that.
That's okay. Can you get me a drink of water? That's all right. Can you get me a drink of water and turn the aircon on?
That's all right.
That's all right.
As I was saying,
need to get all good.
Sure. So as I was saying, once people are aware of what's going on, they're fearful of what's going to happen to them, because on a very practical level, you become a pariah. Then you deal with losing your job. You deal with, you have a look at the people who are speaking out right now in Australia, like Craig Kelly or whoever it is. They've been made out to be crazy people, or worse yet, they've been threatened with lawsuits. So I think the real testing point is having the courage to actually stand against the tyranny, because we have a look at history, right? And I always try to learn from history, because we've seen what's going on in varying degrees. History doesn't always repeat, but it rhymes. And you have a look where you see some kind of horrible thing that's been accepted by the masses, and eventually a small group of people have the courage to actually fight against it. And slowly that turns from 1% to 3%. And I think what we're seeing right now, if you have a look at the recent protests, is that there are more and more people that are waking up every single day. And those few courageous people are actually inspiring others, people like yourself, to actually stand against the tyranny. And it all starts with being the change that you want to see. That's what I believe. I think it's so easy to say that this is the system, but we kind of alluded to this earlier, if you pick at the system, you say, oh, it's this organization, you never get to like real accountability. It has to be on an individual level. You have to say, well, I'm responsible. Soldiers have to say they're responsible, as opposed to this view where the big pharma is not responsible, the government's not responsible, and then the employers that are just mandating this thing are not responsible. I think we have to take accountability. They're my thoughts on how to address this thing. But
100%. I think it comes down to people not complying. Every person, just slowly don't comply. Going back, as you said, as history rhymes. That perfect photo of I think it was from 1936.
One man not saluting Hitler, right?
Not saluting.
Absolutely.
It just comes down to being those people, and it's always been seen like, as we are greater in numbers. There's more of us than there are of them. And that's how we can start standing up and calling them out on their, BS, and just watching the mainstream media and seeing how they twist and distort the truth now. And because I've gone to a few of these rallies, and I'm not a white supremacist. I believe in everyone should have a free choice and with what they do with their bodies, and yet, because I've gone to this rally, I am labeled as one, and that can like damage my career. And again, it comes down to that language that we're also witnessing right now. The dehumanization of each other, like anti-vaxxers and extremists, and our premier even used the word rabid the other day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this slow dehumanization process that's been occurring to create an us versus them attitude. Even in just today, Bank of America have announced to their employees that they're going to have under-vaccinated, boom shakalaka area and the shakalaka area, and segregate them. So now we're starting segregation areas in workplaces. And what's really surprising is everyone's like, well done, great. I'm glad this is happening. And it's just so interesting how even a few months ago, I had friends posting online saying, these people need to be discriminated against and blah, blah, blah. So it's been really interesting to watch how fast and how people are willing to jump on this dehumanization.
Absolutely.
And this sort of, and we know what that leads to. I mean, look at what happened in the Rwanda genocide after years of dehumanization and the propaganda from the radio. So I think it comes down to, what do we do to change this? We need to start just friends who are just not seeing what's been happening, make them question, make them start asking questions, or propose questions to them saying, look at this double standard. Why would this be happening and not that be happening? You know, why has certain countries, especially in Europe, suspended or even banned certain types of companies, boom shaka?
Yeah.
And America has banned one that starts with AZ, but then we have it here. So why is that happening? Isn't it should be the same thing for everyone? You know,
fear is a powerful drug. I have this theory that a lot of my friends tend to call, you know, these people that are buying into this stuff just asleep. But I think there is something that happens to you when you're in this state of fear. You know, you tend to not see things correctly. And I think because the media has been saturating the mainstream news with all of this fear, even with what's going on at the moment with the Omicron strain, you know, even though we don't know much about it, people are leaning in on their fear, and rather than making logical, rational, proportionate responses to this thing, we're seeing things that seem like this stuff has been taken out of some science fiction movie, like the idea of locking people in their homes because you know, someone in another part of the world has come up with something that is not definitively showing any signs of it being worse than what we're already dealing with. And that's kind of how I justify the insanity that is going on. I mean, that, and obviously there are bad actors in play. But, you know, I feel like we've been alluding to a lot of what is going on. And I feel like we kind of have to anytime you're trying to put this out on some mainstream avenue. But if you were to encapsulate what is going on right now in terms of this entire agenda, how would you characterize that? I mean,
I think
yeah,
it's where do you start? To start off with, I'm sure you've heard of the saying, never let a good crisis go to waste.
absolutely.
Type of thing. I do believe that this is a massive shock doctrine on the planet. I don't know if you know much about shock doctrine itself or the principles behind it.
Not specifically, but I might be familiar with it.
So a great book by Naomi Klein. Naomi Klein, yes, not Naomi Wolf. I always get the Naomi's mixed up. And it talks about how a long time ago they realized, obviously, when they used to do psychological shocks on patients, you know, to help cure them for mental illnesses, that's when people are more susceptible to information. So again,
we're talking electroshock therapy here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so what they found was they can actually create this same sort of stimulus response when people are like shocked, as in through like an incident, for example,
Gotcha.
with fear. 9/11 was a
right?
perfect example of that. Look at all the legislation and all the human rights atrocities that were pushed because of 9/11 under the guise of creating peace. So now we have this virus which has been released to a population, and there is huge fear about that. And so now we have again this population who are on high alert, who are very afraid. And a professor by the name of Matthew Desmond talked about a thing called mass formation. And there's 4 stages to mass formation.
What was that word? Sorry?
Mass formation. mass formation.
Oh, mass formation.
Um,
Okay.
Mass formation, and there's 4 stages to it. And the first stage is, you got to start, number one, by socially isolating people from their social bonds. Another stage of creating this sort of mass formation or this mass hypnosis is that there needs to be a lot of people who have a lack of sense making, and so they're unable to come to sensible conclusions. And during all COVID and everything that was happening, people were struggling to try and find rationale and try and put justifications in, because they lost control of the world they used to know. So we've completely taken away their livelihoods and jobs and put this fear on them. Number three is there's like a lot of free floating anxiety that happens because of this. So again, there's nothing to connect their fear or anxiety to that happened during this. So they're unable to deal with that really like sort of gut sense of, that anxiety and what they've been going through. And then there's also lots of discontent with their daily lives. So obviously what we saw was a lot of people all of a sudden were out of work, and they're like, oh, I can't believe I've been doing that for all my life and my life has no meaning, and what am I supposed to do? So when this happens, then their amygdala gets hijacked.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is where that shock doctrine come in. And so
absolutely,
they've got
so this is fight or flight. This is that's the
fight or flight
right?
response. Yeah. This is your most basic instinct responses that comes down to your survival of the species. Mm-hmm. And so when it's hijacked, that's when we can start putting in sort of
people
thoughts or ideas.
More susceptible to programming.
More susceptible, exactly. Mm-hmm. And it starts like disabling your frontal lobe, and that's the part in your amygdala which sort of controls your important cognitive skills, which is what we need at this time: your emotional expression, your problem solving, your memory, your language, your judgment. So that got hijacked during this time. And then all of a sudden, along with, and if you believe in this, and I certainly do, you've got Facebook jumping on, and everyone's sitting on Facebook because everyone they're sitting at home, they've lost social contact with their friends, and the only way they can communicate is through Facebook and all these social media apps. So there you have people sitting there expressing their fears and their pure emotions and their rage and their anxiety and stuff. And there is Facebook collecting all that data and turning it in and using that against each other. Mm-hmm. And that's where we've got that coming in as well. And we're creating echo chambers of someone else's beliefs here and someone else's beliefs there, and then all of a sudden people are becoming more and more divided. Mm-hmm. And I do believe it is this, I don't know if it was an accidental occurrence, that I do believe it was definitely in a lab, and we're seeing more and more documents coming out showing that the origins did come from that, and they're trying to cover it up. Mm-hmm. There's now covering up the certain definitions of boom shakalaka, definitions of anti boom shakalaka people. There's definitions
this Overton window where something that was considered to be good shifts over time, like the words that we use, right? Like human rights was ubiquitously considered a good thing, like the idea of not forcing your will on someone if they're not harming anyone. That's essentially where it comes from, the natural law, the common law. But now we inverse this thing, and now the whole idea of an anti-vaxxer, who is someone that believes in human rights, someone that doesn't want to be coerced to do something, is now made to be a bad thing, and people are calling human rights activists anti-vaxxers. And this speaks to what you're saying, how there's this twisting of language. But I also see this happening with the definitions of, the boom shakalaka as well, like how this stuff is slowly changing, and it's a very nefarious thing.
The definition of boom shakalaka changed twice this year.
Exactly. And this is how I think this war is being won, because people don't even know what they're talking about. Like, I like to have clarity when I'm having a conversation or any kind of debate. Now, when I speak to people, they think I mean something completely different. Like even speaking about, I've been here, I think at the start of the year, a member of the Chinese Communist Party made some speech about human rights and basically defined human rights dealing with subsistence and the common good and all this kind of stuff, which essentially moves away from this idea of individual rights, right? And they paid this idea that it's all about sacrificing your rights now in order to achieve the
Mm-hmm.
greater good. And this is how this thing is twisted around. And we're seeing the same thing done here. It's like, oh, wait a sec, you're a human rights activist. No, you're selfish. No, human rights is all about, no, we got to keep everyone safe. It's like, what? No, you have to, you got to do the right thing and be forcibly inoculated, because that's what human rights is about. And it's like, what? What is going on here?
I don't know if you've ever read 1984 by George Orwell, but there's, or even watched the movie. Great, both are amazing. But there's bits in it where I forgot what his name was. It Winston? It's been ages since I've read the book, and he's
John
sitting
Hurt.
there, played by John Hurt. If you watch the movie, and they're sitting there where they're being told where they have to put a news announcement out, and saying, well, this word means this now. Remember? And at the end, during his brainwashing when he gets captured, you know, he didn't even know what 2+2 was anymore.
Mm. And
And
I'm
and
seeing it happen.
we're witnessing that, and the fact that no one can see that and they're going along with it, and they're not even, no one's even asking questions. And that's and not only that, we're
It's
giving
become illegal to ask
it's
questions.
we're given answers which we're not allowed to question. Perfect
Exactly.
what
It's called the science, right? You can't question the science when the science is supposed to consist of. There is no the science. It consists of the people that are constantly reevaluating the default position, right? Different camps. Science
yeah.
is never settled.
And it's really hard to see on such a global scale that everyone's going along with it and no one's questioning it. And the few people who do question it get censored. And everyone's like going, oh, okay, that's normal. This is fine. It's really interesting to see again how easily people have fallen into being so compliant. And I mean, I have to say the word brainwashing, but that's what it is. It's like the best way of definition I've heard about brainwashing is like, if you can't imagine what you were going to be doing 2 years ago, and you look back going, I can't believe I was agreeing to that, then maybe something has happened. And I study a lot of cults. In fact, like cults, and studying cults is one of my passions. And when everything started going down and I started witnessing everything, it's like, fuck, this just feels too familiar. And a bit of my background was like last year when all this started coming out. I was like, okay, I'm scared. Okay, I've even told my partner back then, like, if the Boom Shakalaka is coming out, I'm going to take it. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. We've got to do this. We've got to protect the people. I can't believe people thinking work is more important than this. And I completely switched 180, because after it was like, I think it started happening a few months after everything. And it's just like, hang on, this is not making any sense. This is not adding up. And like, I could have been a hypocrite and just gone along with the cognitive dissonance, which everyone else was going with. But it's just like, hang on, why, for example, in Australia, why can't people go and visit their dying loved one that then, and enter a state just to hold the person dying in their arm one last time? Yet football players and all their families and kids can get flown in and not have quarantine. And no one's even, like, people are angry, but they're not really angry. They're not doing protests angry. We're letting all these things happen. We're slowly being compliant. And it's got to that point now. It's like, finally people are getting up and rising up and doing everything and noticing all these double standards. But I hope it's not too late.
Yeah. It's so interesting. It's so interesting to me that with you, your perception of what was going on changed, and that's what caused you to change your behavior. And what I want to ask is, like, you strike me as someone that believes in at least the conventional idea of, human rights, choice, that kind of stuff. Has your politics shifted in any way since, but before COVID versus where we are now?
I mean, I've always been a person that sits on the fence and always tries to look at things from both sides of the story, just because that's what I have to do for work.
Sure.
But if anything, if you would have said I lean left more, back
Mhm.
then, but I'm pretty much 100% center now, and I have more compassion. I'm not a right wing person, but I
Mhm.
have more compassion for both, because both people on both sides are sentient beings, and I respect them both. But
Sure.
I'm trying to come over from a really just look at both sides of the story, and there's both sides. There's extreme actors, and you can see that. Uh, I think one thing I watched recently, and it really, and I've showed this to a few people, and it was really terrifying.
Mhm.
Um, Real Rushkin did a live feed a few weeks back when the big protest happened, and before he went to the pro-choice anti boom shakalaka mandate backs, he went to the other opposing protest to get an equal view. And there's this bit where they all
It
surrounded
was actually
him,
an
and we
opposing protest. I mean, I heard they were going on at the same time, but there's actually a protest where people are saying that we have to force people to get the juice, get boom shakalaka. That was the thing.
yeah, and they're the human rights. They're the human rights, very left-leaning ones. And there's this bit,
Yeah.
and you watch it. I want everyone to go back and watch this video. And at the bit, and they're all surrounding him and yelling at him and telling him to f off and that. You look into their eyes, and it's scary, because there's just like zombie. And I've seen that with people who've been in cults.
Yeah.
Um,
What's so
so
interest Yeah, what's so interesting to me about just trying to delineate between the different perspectives here, the left and right, is what I've heard, what I've researched, and what you'll generally, I think, find is the people that tend to be very um, hesitant of the government, tend to be hesitant of taking these inoculations. They tend to be more pro freedom. And this is something that we're finding. You have a look at the politics of most of the people that are going in these marches, and they don't like the idea of this stuff being forced, you know. And granted, they may perceive what's going on differently. They do tend to champion the idea of individual freedom more so. And you find those that are on the left tend to be a bit more trusting of government. The idea that the government's working greatest for our best interest. And I think because of that, you start to see this. I mean, this manifestation of, well, this is for your own benefit. There's no kind of like second guessing what the government is doing, because you tend to be more trusting of them. But to me, I mean, it's not even about perception. Like, granted, we have different versions of human rights in the 21st century. Classically, it was predicated on the idea that of what you call negative rights. Like in common law, there's this concept of usufruct, where so the usufruct, which is when you take something that's not yours, someone's life or property, it's a bad thing. And classic human rights is that you are sovereign. You can't have someone sacrifice themselves for you. But we moved into this realm now where people are actually making the argument that you can have someone sacrifice their own freedom because you want to be safe. This is when you move into this other idea of human rights where people can actually have their rights removed from them. Rights become privileges now, where they can be taken and granted to you by the government. So now we're in a situation where the government's saying, "Oh, well, we'll give you back your freedoms if you undergo this experimental gene therapy," right? And that, to
yeah.
me, that's at least very different from the classical definition of human rights that we had. But I just wanted to point that out.
Well, it's really interesting. I was gonna talk about this. Like, never in, and I there's always that, because I've had a lot of debates on Facebook, but I've had to stop because then I just end up having arguments in my head all night.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole seatbelt analogy, for example, and
Yeah,
and I'm going to get to your point. I'm sort of digressing,
yeah,
but the whole seatbelt analogy now, like, everyone's like, if you wear a seatbelt, you do it for your own good and blah blah blah, it protects you and blah blah blah. But it's just like, hang on, but never, if seatbelts were faulty or if they harm people, they would be recalled,
mm-hmm.
correct? Or if they didn't work, they would try and make the seatbelt better.
Sure.
But never in history has something happened where everyone's saying it's for the greater good, and the adverse reactions, blah blah blah. People are like, well, that's for the greater good. People dealing with these adverse reactions, that's just fine, because at the end of the day, it's for the general population, the general good, and it's to
Well,
keep
actually,
everyone
I'd
safe.
say that has been a common theme throughout history. I mean, that's exactly what the argument the Nazis were. That's the argument most of these tyrants for the greater good. You know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so again, we're seeing that language, and we're seeing I don't know, but like I've been really getting into all this research about all these adverse reactions, because never in the history of boom shakalakas have we had such a, like, if you look at all the graphs dating back of everyone that's been distributed, like adverse reactions stay pretty low, and then they're all spiked all of a sudden.
Yeah, but Nicolette, you can't prove that it was the that it was the boom shakalaka. It could have been a whole variety of things. We don't know that. You know, I mean,
Oh, yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. And there's these great there's these great pages that have come out called YAB, I can't say the word, injuries and stuff like that.
sure.
And all these kids now getting it. Like there's they've been finding out that it's affecting causing transverse myelitis, which affects the spine, and people's spines are being blown out, and they're permanently disabled, and they were completely
Apparently,
healthy
we're saying,
people.
because I want to put this up on
Apparently,
YouTube. This is all, you
yeah,
know, obviously
yeah,
speculation right now. Um,
speculation.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
but it's like people are discredited. That again, this whole thing's happening. Like, well, it's not true. It's not. You've got some issues, or you're lying, or this, or that, and people are now who are injured for whatever reason, but there has to be this common denominator, and now being
made out to seem like crazy people.
discriminated
Mm.
and shamed and told that, well, what's happened to you doesn't matter because this is for the greater good.
Oh, well, I haven't, I mean, typically I haven't been hearing that, at least by the medical establishment. What I've been typically seeing is it's just been completely ignored, you know? But yes, that's
Which
a
is a
thing as
way to
well.
say
People are
that,
saying, well, if, you know, there are always going to be some adverse reactions that, but because of that, I would think that the ethical standard is that, well, it should come down to choice because everything's going to affect different people differently, you know? But with your analogy, I just had to comment on this with the seatbelt analogy. You see, whereas people tend to focus more on the adverse reactions, whether or not this is having a positive or negative effect, right? Or the greater good. I always bring it down to choice. I mean, it doesn't matter if you think a seatbelt is a good idea. If I, as an individual, have been forced to do something, I should be able to decide whether or not I want to wear it. You know, I should be able to take my own level of risk. This idea that because, and this is where we've moved into this realm of public health and well-being, this idea that just because you're doing something for someone's own benefit, you can force anything on them. This is what you were alluding to earlier with the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? And like classically within like classic moral philosophy, that's supposed to be like a definitive no-no. But we moved into this 21st century realm now where you can actually force people, because we always talk about the Nuremberg Code, right? And the most hilarious thing to me is they're saying that this thing, at least fact checkers are saying that it's not a violation of the Nuremberg Code because it's for people's public health and well-being. When the very idea, the first clause of the Nuremberg Code is that you must have voluntary consent with any kind of medical procedure, you know, and that means it's not voluntary consent unless you're doing it for the greater good or for someone's well-being. It's like voluntary consent because unless you have a consent-based system of ethics, you can justify anything. It's so completely opposed to like the basic premise of this idea of human rights or the Nuremberg Code, but it's like the media is just presenting this completely obfuscated worldview now that it's perfectly acceptable and the 1 + 1 is equal to 3. You know, that it's not a violation, and I'm like, what is going on?
yeah. And not only that, with the Nuremberg Code, not only do you have to have consent, but informed consent, but you have to have the facts, and the fact is that they're not even releasing the facts. They refuse to.
Exactly.
So how can you even have consent over something which you've been forced to have? Otherwise, you can't put food on the table, and you can't eat, and you can't support yourself, and you're shamed, and then turn around and say, "Oh, we've given you a choice."
Yeah, and they're doctors that are actively not able to comment on the long-term, short-term effects of this thing even. Otherwise, they will lose their job, courtesy of APRA. That's a thing here in Australia. So it's like, okay, so I'm not able to get advice from you on something. Then I don't have informed consent. Then I shouldn't be able to do this. I shouldn't have to be forced to do this thing. But no, the government's still forcing you to do this thing. It's
Interesting
a
story.
Mm.
I ended up in an ambulance ride a few weeks ago. I was having some heart issues. Don't worry, it wasn't from the boom shakalaka. But as I was in the ambulance, the ambulance people were absolutely amazing, and they kept on saying stuff like blah blah blah, but I'm not supposed to tell you that. So like they weren't even allowed to speak properly. And what I did get out of them was I was talking about things like, well, the hospital beds, because we got given money. The government here got given $4.4 billion to increase hospital beds and stuff. And I said, well, you've got at least all these extra hospital beds. He's like, actually, no, we don't. They've actually taken some away. So it's like, where is this $4.4 million has gone? And then it's just like, where's that question being asked? Where is the question of where is this money going to sort of help us set up? And like, when this was asked in Parliament to say, we want to open up an investigation to find out where this misappropriation of funds has gone, they blocked it. So they blocked the investigation. And then why are people going, well, why did they block the investigation? People are just
Where is the
happily
critical
going.
thinking? Yeah, it's like no one wants to point at the elephant. It's the elephant in the room kind of thing. It's like, well, if you address that, then it's going to lead to a very uncomfortable truth. I think people aren't ready to handle things, so they'd much rather avoid addressing them altogether. But look,
Well,
in terms of
just quickly,
so go on.
just quickly, that happens a lot in again, going back to cult mentality. A lot of the followers and members, it comes down to a lot of them don't want to leave, or it's hard to leave, or it's hard to get them out, because at the end of the day, for them to actually believe that they were living a lie then completely shatters their whole reality. And that's what we're dealing with right now, is people who they don't want their reality shattered because they're holding on to this life that used to be.
Absolutely.
2 years ago. That
Government's
life is
not telling
gone.
me the truth. I can't rely on government. No, that's horrible. No, I can't accept that.
Yeah, but that lie of 2 years ago and things going back to normal is gone, and that's what they're holding on to. And it's hard to deal with that. It's hard for me to tell my friends the same, like, nothing's going to go back to normal. You
I was
realize
just going to
that?
ask you that. I mean, well, I don't want things to go back to normal because let's face it, even a couple of years ago, things were not perfect. That's for sure. It's kind of like you could see the elements of this storm about to erupt. But where we are right now, obviously, it's a completely different ballgame. But do you see there being a path out of this road to hell right now? In the
I
short term? I mean, I personally believe eventually, but in what time frame do you think this is possible? Like, where do you see this perhaps taking on a change where enough people will start like taking these politicians to this town center and beating the shit out of them as they would in the old times?
Look, it can go three ways. The first way is everyone's just going to keep on going along with the narrative and being compliant. We're gonna adopt the digital identity passports that they're now pushing here in Australia, and everyone's going to go along with that. And we're just going to keep on going, and people who are free thinkers are going to be silenced and muzzled out. It can go an opposite way, where the people actually rise up and take this on, and do it now, because of we're slowly starting to see all the corruption, like throughout all this corruption has now become evident, and more people are just going to start seeing this and like start standing in solidarity in the streets. Or it could go another way, where there might be carnage and two opposing views clashing, and it's going to it might get to that stage where a lot of people are going to be hurt and suffering, and that could be it. I mean, I don't want to believe that. I don't want to believe that people resort to going down that road of really to that point of dehumanization, and what we've already started seeing in segregations in workplaces, but we're already starting to see that.
Sure. I mean,
But
if
then
someone's holding you down and forcing you to do something, I mean, at some point, based off of your own inherent right of self-defense, I mean, aren't you supposed to at least defend yourself, defend the people that you care about, your child? If someone's dragging your child to do something that you don't believe is in their best interest, but more importantly, is violating their consent, are we just going to say, well, because they have good intentions, it's okay? I mean, at some point, I keep hearing this argument. No one wants to use violence, but when violence is being used on you, and essentially coercion, which is the threat of violent action, and this is what we're dealing with. It's effectively violence. I mean, to me, I'd say it becomes almost a moral responsibility to some extent anyway to try to avert that violence, if not for you yourself and those that are under your care. If you're taking care of someone, this idea of, well, look, I can't use violence even though it's been thrown on me. I think it becomes a little, yeah, foolish.
I mean, and then going back to what you said, things going back to normal. Like let's look at this on an individual level, for example. Imagine if what they do right now is they get rid of all the mandates and they're like, all right, we're going to scrap the mandates for blah, blah, blah percent. Look at all the people who have already lost their jobs and their years of service, and they're probably bitter and hurt by this. Not only that, like friendships that have been torn apart. I know friends who now don't even speak to each other anymore, or even family members don't speak to each other anymore because of
Yep.
this division.
I'm not sure of that.
I know one workplace, and it's a governmental workplace of a friend of mine, where as he was leaving because he didn't make it and he refused to get the boom shakalaka, he had to resign. They left a tinfoil hat on his desk as he was leaving and abused and shamed him. So things going back to normal on the individual level when there's been a lot of hurt and trauma caused. I don't think a lot of people are going to just all of a sudden snap back. And they've actually done this study, which was really amazing in France, where they looked the brain chemistry and brain waves, and they looked at the lockdown, for example, the effect of the lockdown on people there. And what they found was however long a person was in a lockdown took twice as long for their brain to get back to the way it used to be with the functions. And, for example, like their amygdala and everything else like that. So, and then we've got to remember, even like looking at the younger generation, the kids who haven't even had this time to proper socialize, and that the repercussions of this is going to be years to come. And that's what people aren't realizing right now is like, yeah, things go back to normal tomorrow. Mentally, it's not going to go back to normal. We might think it is, but there's probably going to be a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder from people coming out, and a lot of mental health issues and stuff coming up because of this, and the relationships that have been torn apart and everything else that we've witnessed. And that's just on a personal scale, but not even what we've been witnessing on a global scale with everything else that's been going on. So
Sure.
that's what I say. It's like I have hope that, look, people are very resilient, and as long as we've got things like love and everything else to connect us and push us forward. But the reality is like a lot of people we know do not have these emotional intelligence skills because they've never been taught it. Like a lot of people think when the first lockdowns hit, like to me it was like a force vipassana or meditation. And unless you're being guided through this through people who are experienced, a lot of people don't know how to deal with finding themselves isolated and alone. Because when you're isolated and alone, the first feelings that come up is those fear and shame and guilt. And that's what we're witnessing. So we're witnessing things such as suicides and this and desperation, and increase of people taking increase of antipsychotics, and increase of substance abuse, and increase of domestic violence, because people did not know how to deal with their own personal demons. So it's been really interesting to watch this on all levels of psychology, what's been happening in the world.
Absolutely. It is so refreshing to hear someone talk about this with so many different levels of insight, and I can definitely relate to what you're saying in regards to my friends going through, the issues of just feeling isolated, not understanding what's going on with their psychology, and not having emotional intelligence to climb out of this dark hole, But I think the more we have these conversations, I think the more it's going to make people realize that they're not alone, and that's a good place to climb out of that darkness, And Nicolette, I could speak to you for hours about this, and look, I would love to have you come on again because there's so much we didn't cover, but it's been a roller coaster of awesome conversation dealing with so many fascinating topics right now. But I did want to keep this down to roughly an hour, but I would love for you
That's fine.
to come on at another time. I'm going through a lot of changes right now in my world, but I would love to have you on once I'm a bit more grounded and we can delve into these topics with more gusto, if
Yep.
if you'll be generous enough with your time.
Oh, I'd love to. I haven't even got it into Bitcoin and the metaverse
Exactly.
yet.
That's
So
what I'm like. We got to, yeah, exactly. You know, because if it's anything like our previous conversations, we got a lot of stuff to unpack. So, Nicolette,
yeah.
thank you so much for coming on, and we got to have you on again. If people want to get a hold of your work, you know, whether it's criminology, nutrition, because I know you're a health coach. I mean, you're so many different things, but I'm sure people want to check out your stuff. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
I'm kind of pretty private, to be honest.
Okay. That's
I'm one of those
understandable in
people.
these times. That's for sure.
But yeah. Right now, the only public stuff I really have in which people can probably get a hold of me is Instagram
Sure.
at Nicolette_Panko.com. I
Nicolette
do,
Panko.
and
Okay.
I also do have Gmail if anyone ever wants to reach out to me and write to me. And that's ncoke or ncirca, which is nczoke@gmail.com. If you
Sure.
want to write and get some more information, I've got a folder full of information, files, data, scientific journals. If anyone ever wants to reach out and question anything, I can pass them on to you. Especially when it
Fantastic.
comes to corporate crime and anything else like that.
Yeah, because there is so much of this stuff that I'm sure, you know, people could be delving into this stuff for years with the amount of data that you collected. But Nicolette, once again, thank you so much for coming on the Crystal Journey podcast. It's been an absolute honor to have you on this thing. You are a scholar. You are a powerful, amazing woman with the stuff that you're doing and just the bar that you're setting for other people to stand against the tyranny. So thank you for being you. And once again, I can't wait to have you on again to delve into some other fringe topics connected to what's going on right now.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for being this beacon of communication to everyone. It's people like you who are like one of them are also just as courageous as everyone else because you're letting your voice be heard. So
thank you. Appreciate
all the blessings towards you.
Thanks, Nicolette. You have yourself an amazing day. Ladies and gentlemen, be sure to check her out and let us know what you think. Until next time, Nicolette. Wow.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
You won't work it, don't make the rest, you won't make it. I don't even care where this road